Hello, it's time again for another episode of the WCK podcast. Today we have another interview with the DM podcast in our series in which we interview some of the community's dungeon masters. I am very excited to interview an up-and-coming DM in our community, one of the newer ones. Initially, when this person posed a new campaign to run to the community, I wasn't able to join, and I had the sads and was completely bummed about it. But lucky for me, due to a series of circumstances, which are unfortunate for other people, I have been able to join the last leg of the journey in his campaign experience. And the difference between now experiencing you as a DM and when I played with you in a one-shot that you ran maybe a year ago in the server has been truly amazing, and I've loved watching you grow. Joe, welcome. I'm
Hi.
excited to have you here today in the DM hot seat.
I'm very excited too.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm so well. Now, I'm really kind of excited to talk about this topic, which I have anticipated your answer for. So you have a different intro into your DM story and journey than most other people on the server. Um, I think probably because yours aligns a little bit with mine in terms of how we both got into D&D. Can you tell me about your introduction to D&D and DMing and your experience?
Yeah, sure.
How'd you get started?
I got started because of a mini version of myself.
Mhm.
My son, who's 7, nearly 8 now, really wanted to get into something like this. We went to the local game store looking for advice on Pokemon cards, and while we were there, he saw things like Magic the Gathering, and he saw D&D, and we got chatting to someone. And he was desperate for me to run games for him. So I started looking into it, trying to find out more about it. And with the purpose only of running games for him, just so that he and his friends could be happy and occupied. And then the game store that we had found, pretty much the week that we found it, shut down. So I put this plea out on Facebook saying, hey, does anyone know of an alternative to this store? Because I've got my son really excited about it, and now I'm going to let him down. And thankfully, one of our community members hooked me up. And I went from... I joined the community and went from, I would like to maybe run some games with my son. The more I can learn about this, the better, to maybe I should play a game so that I get a better understanding of how this works. And then it took a little while before I actually ran a game for my son, because I really enjoyed it and got overexcited about it. But yeah, then I didn't shirk my responsibilities. I still then pursued trying to learn how to DM well. So I played a couple of games. I think Lee ran one, Jason ran one, you ran one. And I played as a player so I could see how someone else DMs, and then immediately started trying to run one-shots for myself. We bought the Icefire Peak campaign primarily for my son to play, and I said to him, well, rather than you having the secondary experience, why don't I learn how to play it with people who are experienced, and then I can run it in parallel for you, which I did for a few months. The game that I run online is still going strong. As you say, you've now joined it. You saved the party from total annihilation, which is definitely...
I just calmed the chaos a little bit before I ramped it back up again. But anyway,
it was perfect. Whereas my son's game, unfortunately, sort of disappeared a little bit because of time commitments and so on. But I still try and run things for him. But yeah, it's been that was, as you say, a year ago. So it's been a really fast and furious and trial by fire journey up to now.
It has been, and it's on one hand, it's weird that I was thinking about it and I was like, oh yeah, it was about a year ago, and then I was like, it's only been a year, And then at the other time, I'm like, it's been a year?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems so close and like you've just been around for forever all at the same time. But uh, let's talk about running games for children. So initially, just because this is how I operate, I share about me, and then we have shared experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
when I got into it because of my oldest son, um, I had always kind of wanted to play D&D when I was younger and didn't have any friends who were, or maybe I did, and they just kept it a secret and I didn't voice it, and so it was never, pulled from me. But we thought maybe D&D was a little too heavy and we're looking for other systems, and we found this system called Little Wizards, which actually I think I've been meaning to talk to you about for almost a year now. I have the book, and if you remind me I'll show it to you. But it might be good. It's a much less complex system, more like those ones that we've seen that have little tiny D6 pools, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you went straight into D&D as it
Yeah.
is. And D&D can be heavy, and you can obviously scale it back and make it lighter for kids. But sometimes the structure and then kids' chaotic brains can go all over the place, and it's really hard to, when you have an established pre-written kind of thing, stay streamlined while you're not trying to railroad. So talk to me about your experience in DMing for little ones.
So, I mean, like I say, one of the first things I did was buy the Icefire Peak campaign module, which I did because of watching a bunch of YouTube videos and talking to a few people who I'd met about what was a good option, and that was sold as this is everything you need to run a campaign.
Yeah, one of the starter or
Yeah,
essentials kits. Yeah, yeah.
it came with like all the essential rules. It came with a fairly concise DM guide that wasn't like a massive tome, so it was easy to get through.
Yep.
It came with a DM screen, which has almost everything you need on it. And one of the first quotes in the one of the books that comes with it is, I'm going to paraphrase, along the lines of, uh, "The rules are here to enable you to have fun. You don't have to stick to them," which
Yeah.
was super empowering for it to get a book from a shop that said, these are, you don't have to do this. Was really useful, especially for kids, because like you say,
Yeah.
you can make best laid plans can get railroaded very quickly by children.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, they also get railroaded by adults, I've discovered. So
Yes.
just in very different ways. I think one of the big challenges is keeping kids engaged and interested,
Yep.
and especially because every child is different, and I think children are typically on the extremes. So where one child is super invested and wants to talk non-stop, another child is sitting there bored, fiddling with something, and only really wants to do the stabby stabby.
Sure. Yep.
And they don't have the thing that adults have, where they're like socially conscious and will politely wait their turn,
Hmm.
and will be polite and listen to someone even though they're not interested until it's their turn, and then they'll be enthusiastic. They'll just go off into their own world. So
Yeah.
that was a real challenge to manage. Um, and in fact, I think I ran one session of Icefire with adults and then with my kids, just to see how it worked out, because it was like this pre-written module and I didn't have to think too much about how to set it up, and it told me all the
Hmm.
hooks that I needed, and that was awesome. And then fairly quickly, I built a one-shot from the ground up and just came up with the story. And I figured maybe this would be easier, because then I could just feel free to make stuff up on the spot.
Sure. Yep.
And that was great and worked really well with the adults. But with the children, it actually made it orders of magnitude more difficult, because kids ask weird questions.
Yeah.
And and sometimes your on the spot improvised answer is perfectly adequate for them. And
Hmm.
sometimes they will keep digging and digging and digging, and it can become very overwhelming very quickly.
Mm.
if you don't have a load of sort of bullet points or something written down for backstory. So I actually found myself going back to I Spy for the kids because a lot of the lore was already written down for me, and I could rely on Wikipedia and Googling
Yep.
things to find those answers if I didn't have the energy to keep going with the improv. But yeah, it was nice to have that experience of trying to do something myself, learning how to build something, but also having this pre-written module that I could just follow if I wanted to. I will say, actually, in retrospect, the two hardest factors about running for kids I find are keeping their attention, like I say, especially physically. I'm sure if it was online, I would notice less. But physically, I had 3 kids around my table, and when one of them in particular wasn't very good at kind of staying engaged in the bits that didn't involve them directly, they would literally get up from the table and walk off. And they'd go play with other things. And then I'd be like, "It's your. Do you want to do anything? It's your turn." They would be like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah," and then they want to completely dominate, and that was really difficult to manage in a way that isn't really an issue with adults. And I think other adults are much better at kind of policing each other on things like that as well.
Sure.
Whereas the kids sort of let it happen.
I also think, right, when you're talking younger ages, still developmentally, they're very egocentric,
Yes.
right? And if it's not my turn, what is anything even happening? If I'm not involved, the story's not it's not taking place. And so I will just actually mention where I'm trying to think. I don't think I've run a kids game completely online, but what I did, which I decided I will never do again, is I ran a game where we used D&D Beyond so the kids had their computers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're still leaving the table. They're just mentally leaving the table because they're opening a new tab. And so their physical presence is still there, but the challenge still is, to keep them from going squirrel
Yeah.
and completely leaving, regardless, I think, of whether you have technology or not. Just a question: did you use maps and minis, or was it all theater of the mind? Because I'm wondering if any of that stuff to play with and fidget with, but keep them engaged, would have
I feel
helped.
really sorry for my boy because he was a guinea. Originally, the adults were meant to be the guinea pigs, and I would use what I learned on him, but he ended up being the true guinea pig.
Hmm.
So my very first session with him, we ended up going into a mine, and I'd like spent time thinking about how I want them to. I don't want them to go in and see the layout of the mine. I want them to discover that. But I know that my boy, at least, and probably one of the other kids, needs some physical reference if they're going to be traversing through a mine. Like if it was just in a field, sure, theatre of the mind would work, but through a mine, they need some physical frame of reference. So I spent hours scaling up this map on a Word document and then printing it out in A4 pieces that I could reveal bit by bit on our big dining room table.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It worked really well, but it just wasn't worth the time that I put into it. Honestly, that sounds horrible, but like,
I mean,
it just did. It wasn't worth the time that I put into it.
be honest, as an adult and as a parent, time is a precious commodity,
Yeah.
and so I get it. We did something similar in terms of we have this big it's not dry erase, it's wet erase, but like this big grid map that we can draw on. And but it's always challenging because if little greasy hands are touching it, then you're erasing pieces. And so we would put pieces of paper over it and then reveal it as you go. But oops, I accidentally knocked this paper away, and it just yeah, I completely understand.
Yeah, I mean, it worked well because as I say, I did it on the dining room table. The map was bigger than the table, but as they progressed, I just kind of moved the sheets
Yeah,
around.
shifted it
Like
all around.
they only needed to see 4 A4 sheets or so at a time. So it worked well. It was a lot of effort and a lot of time for something I was probably only ever going to use once.
Hmm.
I did do Theatre of the Mind with them as well. There were a couple of locations that worked very well. The kind of central town, Fandalin or Fandalin or however, I keep getting pulled up on how I pronounce that, but hey, I say Fandalin. I'm gonna stick with it. That main town was very easy to just do theatre of the mind.
Hmm.
I love doing voices. I wouldn't say I'm good at them. I love doing them, and that helped the kids. So when they went into a new location, they essentially knew where they were by my voice.
Hmm.
Um, and that's still true today. When I do play with them again now, it's that they can go to Fandalin and they know exactly where they are, just
Yeah.
because I changed my accent. But actually, what I ended up doing most, and my kind of preferred way to do it now, I'm fortunate enough that I have a small mini projector, and
Mm.
I set that up over my dining room table and project it onto the dining room table. I close all the blackout blinds,
Yep.
and I can set up the room however I want it, like light wise and sound wise. And I sit at one end of the table with my laptop as my DM screen,
Yep.
and I've got my physical DM screen as well, so for quick reference for rules, and it projects the map, and I just control all the tokens, which has so many benefits. There's no paper flying around. I don't have to
Yep.
worry about the kids spilling drinks or anything, so they can snack all over the map. It doesn't
Yeah. Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
Um, they can't move the tokens around and be like, oh, but I want to go over here, and then I have to remember
Hmm.
they still feel like they have control and they can
Yep.
interact physically with what's on the table. But
Yeah.
I have all of the autonomy in what's happening, and it works
That
incredibly well.
I love that. I think that's that's translatable to adults too. I think if you have resources to be able to do that, that's a
Yeah.
really good setup.
I look many times at either buying or building like a screen to put on the table.
Yep.
There's If you go on D&D groups, there's always people advertising that they've either made or bought these things, and they're awesome.
Hmm.
But honest to God, if you've got a flat surface and a dark room, I think my projector was £25 off Amazon, and it's
Yeah.
still going strong, and that works. I can also move that really easily. Like when we
Yeah.
needed to go for dinner, I just took it off the ceiling, moved it to the lounge, put it on the ceiling there, and we carried on playing in the lounge. It was great.
That's interesting. I bought too long ago to still be in the box, but it's definitely still in the box as I'm looking over there at it. I bought a projector, and so now my wheels are cranking. I hadn't even considered using it for this purpose instead of that map that I hate now because it'll be out in the middle of our floor and the dog will decide to, to
Yep.
walk all over it. And now it's creased and crinkled. But anyway, so we've talked a little bit about it, but what do you think is different and what do you think is similar to running for kids versus adults? And what was maybe surprisingly similar or surprisingly different?
Surprisingly similar was let's say the range of characteristics of the people playing, right? So
Hmm.
every game I've had, there's been someone who is super into RP, and one of my kids' friends, I almost have to like stop him because
Hmm.
he'll just RP for 20 minutes and everyone else is kind of sitting there. But and like I said before, adults police each other and will
Hmm.
interrupt each other when they'll politely interrupt each other or try and join in or whatever, and kids aren't as good. So there's a similarity and a difference straight in itself. Kids, I think it's amazing how like there'll be one person who's really into their RP, one person who's really into their fighting, one person who's super quiet the whole time. And
Mm.
that's true whether it's adults or kids. The difference there lies, I think, in the self policing. When you're dealing with kids, I found as the DM, I had to do all of the work
Hmm.
in making sure that everyone was getting a turn, everyone was having fun. Whereas with adults, they sort of, if someone's not having fun, they'll either do something about it or they'll leave.
Right,
Um,
right.
Whereas kids are a bit more mm, mm, obtrusive
They're
in that
not
way.
as socially experienced, right? They
Yeah.
don't know how to rope people into their experience either. You see this person across the table that's kind of picking at their fingers, and then to ask them a question if you want their
Mm,
involvement. But kids don't quite get that
no.
yet. So.
Um, Also, adults and kids get excited over the same things, right? And especially when, like I said, I've got this projector, and when I'm putting a map on the table or something, and I reveal something, I got the same reactions in both the adult and the child version of I Spy Peak that I ran,
Hmm.
and the one shot that I made for New Year, same thing. I get the same excitement over the reveals, or I get the same, if a trap is sprung, it's incredible how childish adults will behave and how adult children will behave in certain circumstances. That sort of levels the playing field, which is really, really fun. I think also, though, everyone has the same struggles with creating characters, but kids get over that struggle much easier. Like choosing what race to play, choosing what class to play, trying to work your way around what rules there are and what am I allowed to do. I've found the kids are much more likely to. Again, this multifaceted. Adults will say, "Ah, I'm an aarakocra. I've got wings. Does that mean I can fly?" And you say yes or no, and they'll accept the answer pretty much. There's always exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking,
Sure.
they'll ask those cool questions and want to include flavor, but then also accept your ruling. Kids are much more likely to say, I'm a kenku. Can I fly? Oh no, because you don't actually have wings. You've just got feathers and you've got hands. Yeah, but I've got feathers and feathery things can fly. So can't I fly? Like you end up having these debates where they will try and force the things that they want, which initially I found really irritating, honestly. But the more I played with them, the more I embraced them and just, you know what? Yeah, sure. You can't fly, but you can hover. That's cool.
It's no game breaking.
Yeah.
Ability there. Yeah.
And they will always try and push the boundaries, and sometimes they will want to do game breaking stuff, but and they're far less likely to accept it when you say no.
Yeah.
But that keeps me on my toes and makes me adapt and learn how to allow people to have a bit of flavor in their characters and allow them to bend the rules for rule of cool. But it also just makes the game so much more fun when you've got someone who's like, I really want to do this. Please let me do this. Rather than saying, "Oh, can I do this?" No. Oh, okay, no worries. Like some people, adults will shut down a lot of the time. Like when you say no to them, they'll then shut down and be quiet and let someone else try something different. Whereas a kid would just sit and push and push and push until you accept their answer.
I feel that pain on a parenting level and as a fellow DM of children. Yeah, no, I think that it has helped me really just kind of get into and fully engage the rule of cool because why not? So many times, why not? If there's not a reason why you can't do something mechanically or story wise, then if it's supposed to be about fun and the only thing stopping you from having fun is bending this one little thing, like you said in the very beginning, right? That little blurb that Wizards of the Coast or whoever put in is basically these are guidelines and you can kind of it's your job to make the story what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah. Now you touched on a couple of times that one shot, and certainly you've run more than one shot at this point. But for those, you created homebrew scenarios versus you running the pre-written campaigns. Um, you kind of talked about what it's like kid versus adult to have a homebrew world versus a pre-written campaign and which one is easier. But what do you personally, Joe, like about one versus the other? And for your adventures in the future, once Icefire Peak has concluded, I know that we've talked about potentially continuing on that story, but that's just continuing on that story. Do you see yourself as a homebrew kind of guy, or do you kind of like the structure and the fact, maybe even for time's sake, that you don't have to think about creating as much because you have a jumping off point? What do you feel one way or the other about homebrew versus pre-written?
So this it actually brings me on to something I kind of had working in my mind a little while ago. There's a time and a place for everything, right?
Sure.
There's definitely a place for those one shots that you can get from websites where it's like, oh, this is ready to go. It's 2 hours, needs 3 players. Just read the material and you can do it. It is incredibly fun making your own stuff, but it's really time consuming, and you can get really precious over this is how when you're writing it, this is how I think they're going to react and where I think they're going to go, and you kind of try and plan scenarios, and you can get very precious about it and I personally got quite frustrated when Not just because, there's the tropes and the memes where it's like, oh, DM spends hours preparing stuff and then the players don't even open the door. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of okay with that. But it can be really frustrating when entire scenarios go the wrong way, or you players just refuse to go the direction you're trying to encourage them to go in. Or
are you sure you don't want to buy this special cup? It's refillable and it's the best.
But especially when if there's a scenario where doing this thing that any reasonable person would do is going to seriously help them out next session, and they just refuse to do it, and then next session they whine and whinge about how it's so hard and you're like, well, yeah, but if you'd just done that one thing that I kept hinting at, then you would have
that carrot was dangling in front of you the whole time, and you just kept pushing it out of the way.
And that's that whole scenario is far less upsetting, far less stressful, far less irritating if you're using a pre-written module, because you can just sit back and be like, all right, fine. Whatever.
Yeah, it's not your baby.
I didn't spend my time on this. I think I'm in a position where I personally don't have the time resources to run an entire campaign home. I've seen how the other GMs do it, and I'm always in awe of what they come up with and how they do it. And I just don't have the capacity to do it. But I've loved running a campaign where the characters have really got to know each other. So the campaigns, I'm all about using pre-written stuff, and especially official stuff that's written well and has lots of. And that's not to say all official stuff is well written, sure. But if you can find stuff that's well written, it's well worth your time, and that's really good for campaigns. For one shots, I really love coming up with stuff from scratch and fleshing out something that I want to do. And you may have noticed that pretty much all of my homebrew one shots have a theme, and quite often it's a nostalgic theme for me. My first ever one shot was a New Year's Eve one shot, which centered around the Y2K bug, which for any of us old enough will recognize. And then I did one more recently for Bill and Ted Adventure, and then at the end of it discovered that one of my players got none of the references. He was just flying through it and was like, oh, cool, there's this guy called Bill. He had no idea who Bill and Ted were. But that's okay, because it was for me, and I got to play out some fun fantasy.
I mean, I got it, so thanks. I got the Y2K, I got the rock lobster, I got all of it.
You in all of my material from now on. But yeah, one shots I love building my own stuff. Campaigns, I think I personally will probably only ever do pre-written modules, and there's also the argument for doing a little bit of both in between. I have included some homebrew stuff in the pre-written I Spy Peak module, especially when players are missing and I don't want to advance the plot line, the core plot line. So I've come up with something for them to do in the week so that everyone still has something to play. And I've done pre-written modules for one-shots when I've been like, you know what, I really want to run something tonight. That's not enough time for me to put something together. So yeah, moral of the story, time and place. I love all of it, and I think everyone should just do what they are capable of and don't stress it out. Just make sure you're having as much fun as the players.
So along those lines, do you, flat question, do you enjoy being a DM?
Yes.
Yes. What is I feel like I know the answer, but what is the hardest thing for you about it?
Okay, there's a couple of answers to this that I could give, and one of them feels one of them I don't want to give, but is probably the most accurate one, and that is I am dyslexic, and reading material and multitasking while reading and speaking and trying to write notes down and taking notes for recollection, that whole pocket of activities is by and far the hardest thing for me. And it detracts from the fun sometimes, because if a lot is happening and I'm having to write notes to make sure that I remember it for the future, I have to completely disengage while it's happening. I'm really lucky that I've got players who are great at RP, so I can occasionally just let them go off into their own little world while I do what I need to do. but everything from writing notes to someone does something I need to rule checking rules. It devastates me when I don't know the answer and can't find it quickly, and I feel like a bit of a failure to the players. And I know it's
Human.
ridiculous. Yeah, I know it's ridiculous,
Human.
but
Mhm.
it feels really you have this pressure on you to like, but you're the game master. You're supposed to know and be in control, and especially because all of my games have had very experienced players in it, and I'm happy to defer to them. At the same time, they're here to have fun. I don't want to have to keep asking them, "Oh, what's the rule on this?"
Just to interject, I don't think that any of the people that you play with, and I know who you're referencing, I don't think that that detracts from anyone's fun. So just step that aside for a second.
Yeah, that's the truest answer, honestly. The alternative answer to that would be very simply uh, managing people's expectations. I find difficult. Um, like I alluded to at the beginning, some people are there for mostly for RP, and some people are there just to fight baddies. And in a one shot, that's fairly easy to control. You can kind of set an expectation fairly early on. In a campaign, that's harder because some sessions will be just RP heavy, and some will be combat heavy, and you just have to roll with it. I did learn very recently from Jason, actually. We're about to start a new arc, and he did a session 0, and it's the first time so many of the campaigns I've joined halfway through.
Yep.
Which is great, but also I miss the learning practice of how a session's 0 is set up. I took away so much from that session 0, just learning how to do certain things very well. And one of the first questions he asked me was, what do I personally want to get out of the campaign? Whether I wanted RP, whether I wanted combat, whether I wanted emotional damage, or whether I wanted to just kind of wander through and just have fun with some friends each week. And it sounds ridiculous, but that had never really occurred to me as a question to ask. I guess because my one campaign that I've run is a pre-written module. So yeah, someone might want RP, but I still have to kind of lead the storyline on.
Sure.
But yeah, that was a big learning point for me, and I really, really enjoyed being a part for session 0. So next time I can implement some of that too. But managing people's expectations, I think, is a challenge, and I've now learned how to do it better.
Well, I mean, you're still very relatively fresh, and because just for to put it on the table for everybody, Joe does a majority of the work for this podcast. So first of all, yay, Joe. But um, this now is the third interview with the DM that I have conducted, but I've already done Jason. Jason's been doing this for far longer than I even knew. So on the time scale of experience, you and I were both still relatively short on that time. And you've only really, I mean, you had that kids one that you ran, and this is the first one that you're now just ending. So and you said that. I think that a good majority of the things that I joined have also been kind of inserting and jumping in. And I will say that not every DM does a session 0 like that. And I love that too, because it's really important, like you said, to know what your players want out of it. And if you have 9/10 of your player that are like, we want to just beat things up, and you have one person who's like, I think I would like to RP 90% of the time, you might have a trouble like figuring out any sort of balance with that, and you might have to figure that out from the get. But anyway, so is there anything that you have learned either as a DM or as a player that has helped you on the flip side of the screen?
I mean, there's a lot. I'm pausing because there's a lot to choose from. I feel like a lot of what I have learned and a lot of what we learn happens in drips and drabs, right? There's tiny little things constantly happening. We joined a game recently where we quite often talk about, trigger warnings and making sure people are comfortable and happy to play and so on. But we joined a session recently where someone had a built-in button for a trip that like instantly pauses the game, everything stops, and that's inspired and a really, because frankly, as much as you want to say, hey, let me know what your triggers are, and we'll pause the session and we can. It's very easy to be fluffy about that. It's quite difficult to have a hard stop when someone has a trigger that they might not even have been aware of. What a cool way to be a good GM, and what a cool way to be able to join in sessions. And yeah, session 0 stuff. Like there are things that got brought up that I just hadn't occurred to me. So there's tons of things I've learned, and I feel like every time I play, I learn something new. One of the things I will say is, if you run a session, if you were interested in DMing something or trying something out, do it more than once with many different people so that you get different perspectives. But I think, and make sure that you give the time for people to explore and play around with the scenario, and do it with as many different groups of people as possible. Doing it with kids and doing it with adults and doing it physically versus doing it virtually and all this stuff helps you learn so much quicker than doing a one shot once with one set of people and then saying, cool, that worked well. What do you think worked? Oh, cool, yeah, maybe I'll do another one next month. It's just, it doesn't work well. So yeah, do if you're going to run something, run it as many times as you're able with as many different people as possible, and have fun with it. But critically, don't. I said this in the last podcast. I'm going to say the same stuff. This might be my motto. Don't sweat the small stuff. The biggest thing I've learned, I think the one key thing I've learned in all of it is, hey, they really need to do this to progress. Cool, they didn't do it. That's okay. They can come back to it later. You can adjust the storyline. What's written down it's not gospel. Don't sweat it. Just move on. Keep trying. Don't sweat the small stuff, because the more you worry about the little things, the harder it is to enjoy what you're doing.
I think that's just life lessons with Joe. Insert inspirational music here. Speaking of enjoying, though, what makes things enjoyable for you as the game master? Is there a particular kind of player or character dynamics, or I don't know what makes the game enjoyable for you as the DM?
Are you ready for a really corny answer?
Yes.
My players having fun.
Oh.
But no, I mean, seriously, it is a corny answer, but there's reason and legitimacy behind it. If my players are having fun, when they walk into a tavern and I voice act the bartender and start a conversation, if they are having fun, they are significantly more likely to interact with that bartender and do a bit of role play and maybe throw a bar stool and start a fight if they're interested in fighting. They're way more interested likely to be engaged if they are having fun and interested. And that means I end up having way more fun because I get to flow with whatever they're doing. But also, if my players are all having fun, there have been many times, especially in more recent sessions, where a scenario has happened. Maybe there's been a big encounter or a big revelation. And then I sit back and just listen for 15 minutes, 15 solid minutes, where I'm doing nothing. And the players are just gaming it out between themselves and chatting and largely doing role play. And getting to that point where they can do it. I love it. It's really good. But yeah, it sounds corny, but if my players are having fun, that ultimately means I'm going to have way more fun too. So that's the thing that I like most about DM, is enabling them to enjoy themselves.
I don't think it's corny. And I think it's a really great answer, because honestly, nobody should be coming to the table not having fun, including the DM. And I think a lot of people put pressure on making it so their players have fun. But if you find the fun in them finding fun, then it's all around fun. It's a lot of fun,
Yeah,
right?
I
Fun,
agree.
fun, 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 fun. Um, so in closing, there are just a couple more questions. Two of them kind of go together. So, in your experience so far, do you have like a favorite moment of yours, or a moment where you've been really kind of proud of yourself as a DM, or proud of your players, because that's still really kind of you being proud as a DM too. Are there any particular, and it's okay if there aren't, but are there any particular moments that just off the cuff feel really stand out to you?
There are two in particular, one very early on and one very late on. I'll start with the later one because I've just said it. The whole sit back and watch my players have a conversation. That sort of scenario happened very recently in my Icefire Peak campaign with the adults, where they had gone to help someone, that person wasn't there, and then they went to another location, and there were more enemies to encounter. And what does all of this mean? And the fact that I got that they got there, and that I helped them to get there, and that they were asking questions related to the source material that had never been brought up until this moment. Like I had helped them follow this journey to get to a point where they could have a conversation and hit all the right notes and hit all the right points that they shouldn't know anything about. That was cool. I was really pleased and proud of myself that I'd helped them make that journey. Pleased that they were all able to have that RP. But the other thing that comes to mind, toot my own horn for a minute, because very early on in my DM career, we're talking like month after I bought the Icefire Peak campaign book, I realized I was still learning how the dice rolls worked. The adult group that I set up, I'd very deliberately said anyone's welcome, but novices and newbies would get priority because we were going to learn together. And I realized, crumbs, how all of the dice rolls work and the difference between a skill versus an ability versus a saving throw
Hmm.
and all that. It feels really complicated, but actually it's pretty simple once you know the terminology. And I wanted a way to set that up for my players. So I made it so that Fandalin had a fate come to town. And I came up with, and this is not, I didn't invent this, I've seen examples of it since, but at the time it was new to me. Um, I made it so that there were a bunch of stalls and games at the fete, and they got to do different roles, but depending on what the activity was. And it was a 100% RP, like 2.5 hours of just going around the fete, playing games,
Hmm.
and having fun together. And the fact that I inserted that as a brand new GM into this pre-written module, so that my players could learn how everything was going to work. They tested their RP, they tested all of their dice rolls. We got to make sure their character sheets were correct, because if
Hmm.
they couldn't take part, then the character sheets weren't. So it just, I'm really pleased that I put that together with so little experience, and I have used it again since because it worked so well.
I love that. Um, I think a question that I would love to know the answer to is, how has, because I feel like it has, so not has it, but how has D&D in general impacted your day-to-day life?
time, time is the main thing. So, and that's a negative and a positive, right? It consumes a lot of time, but it's time having fun mostly. The prep work, obviously, sometimes is enjoyable and sometimes it's less so, but time is the biggest factor. Uh, but you get to know people really well. So, on the flip side, just making friendships, forming bonds with people that I might not otherwise have contact with, is a massive impact. Um, Especially because when I first started, I was in a position where I was at home with the kids every evening and on my own.
Hmm.
So it couldn't easily go out and meet people or get to know people. And it was a great way of forming social bonds that have lasted, well, they've lasted this long, and hopefully I'm sure will last a lot longer. So the biggest impact is time and friendship.
My a final question that I had written down to ask you. I feel like you already covered, but you can either repeat it or if there's something else you want to say here, please feel free. But as far as people who are nervous to start their journey as a GM, or people who are just starting out, maybe had a game and it didn't quite go the way that they had anticipated it would go, what kind of advice would you give to those people?
Okay, I have three things. I think the first one uh, is don't be afraid to steal material. So whether that's using source material that's like a pre-written module, or if someone you know runs a session that you play in, and you're like, that was really good, just ask them if you can use it, because then at least you've seen how someone ran it and you've got the flow of how it would work. Don't be afraid to change things and to make stuff up, because it's just a game and you're there to have fun.
They don't know, you don't know.
They don't know, you don't know. And lastly, don't sweat the small stuff. Like, if it doesn't work out the way you want it to, it's cool. Don't worry. Most people are still having fun. They don't notice.
Inspirational music ensues here. Well, Joe, thank you so much. I really loved being able to sit down with you today and listen to your journey into becoming a dungeon master. Some things I knew, some things I didn't know, and I'm thrilled to have been able to have joined you for a part of your adventure. I can speak with absolute confidence that your players adore you, and you've given us an experience we'll treasure for forever and ever and ever. So, first of all, on behalf of CBAT, you're the best and we love you. But from all of us at WCK, thank you so much for doing what you do to enhance our community, both in terms of the games and content that you bring to us, but for your help in giving us insights like this with podcasts, but also for your really great work in making this podcast happen. So again, thank you so much, Joe. Thank you to everybody listening for making it through yet another episode of this podcast. We're still having fun. We hope that you are as well. So until next time, stay cool. And if you can't be cool, Joe, what are you going to be?
Be wicked.
Be wicked. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you to Kev G. Moore for providing the music for this series. Check out his links for YouTube, Spotify and Patreon in the links below. Wherever you found us today, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content, and if you want to find out more about what we do, how to support us, pick up some merch and find links to our friends like JB Media, visit us at wickedcoolkids.co.uk.